Well, a big hey now to everyone out there, and a happy new year. I think we're all solidly into 2026 now. This is going to be a HEX bond desk and yield market update. I have to work on that title a little bit. Just going to go over what we're seeing in action with the bond market. And for those who are not aware of it, right, we have HEX on Pulse Chain. And in addition to HEX, there are several types of products or derivatives out there. One of them is actuator.finance. Maximus Dow is another. And when we look at these, and Hedron, of course, HSIs, when we look at these all in, underneath one grouping, you can kind of look at it as a bond market. A bond market. So we're going to get into that a little bit and just see where we're at, what the status is. Share up my screen here and get started. See where we're at. All right, so real high level. So a lot of people ask about this. They're like, well, I don't understand HTTs. What are HTTs? What are they? What's a hex time token? Well, you know how hex has a hex day? The first day of hex was hex day 1. And now we're currently on like hex day 2223, something like that. And so every day that goes by, the contract immediately keeps track of the number of days and what hex day we're on. And so then every time somebody stakes, you can stake for a specific hex day in the future to end. And so simply an HTT 3000 is a hex stake that the HTT 3000 is tied to a redemption day of 3000. And what that means is if you had HTT 3000s on day 3000, you can turn them in 1-for-1 with HEX. 1-to-1 to HEX. And if it's HTT 5000, and on day 5000, you can turn in HTT 5000s 1-to-1 for HEX because you're redeeming them. You're redeeming them. Now, how did that come about? Why is that coming about? Well, someone, you can't just mint these things out of thin air. HTTs are backed by HSIs. HSI is a hex staking instance underneath the Hedron protocol. So what users are able to do, and I'm just going to keep it simple for this round, they're able to do is if they have an HSI or if they stake a new HSI, they're able to mint, from that HSI, the HTTs. So the process is they have the HSI, they delegate it to the actuator protocol, which is immutable and also audited. The underlying stake, continues to earn rewards in HEX, continues to earn Hedron. The user retains ownership, even though they've delegated it potentially for a period of time to the actuator protocol, and they're able to then mint according to whatever the rules are, and those you can find on actuator.finance, a certain number of HTTs of each type. You can only select one per HSI, but quite often what people are doing is Quattro Cincos to maximize what they get for T-share rate, and then they use those Quattro Cincos to mint others. But that's not the only way. So HTTs are simply HEX in the future. HEX in the future. So what this has created is a very interesting protocol. Obviously not as popular, not as well known as a lot of other things. I mean, Pulse Chain is a subset of crypto. HEX is a subset of Pulse Chain. HEX staking is a subset of HEX. And so we get all the way down to Actuator. Actuator is just another subset of the HEX staking. And so we get all the way down here. It's very early, even though it's I guess we're going on over a year now, right, from launch. So a year and a couple months. It's still very early, still really focused. Only those people who really are interested in HEX staking in the first place I think, are even interested in talking about actuator. But for those who are HEX staking, it is something to know about, at least to know about. Whether you participate in it or not is up to you, and doing your own research on the project. And so the basic idea is that a whole yield market has been created using HEX as the backing. Right? And so what it does is it brings up opportunity for people to access their HEX liquidity early, right? And earlier than their end date, right? Because if I do a HEX stake, there's nothing I'm doing with that HEX stake, a native HEX stake, until it comes out. I own it. It's in my wallet, quote unquote, it's in my wallet. There's no access to it. I just wait. Now, like I've covered on previous streams, yeah, that is a mode of operation, and there's nothing wrong with that mode of operation, and that is very much a maxi view. If you come to that conclusion that you only want to do native staking, and that's it, that's on you and what you want to do with it. But the biggest problem that we've run into, I think, with HEX staking, from what I hear from people, is, hey, I don't want to lock up my value and not have access to it. And so this provides options. HSIs, in fact, provide optionality. The idea that you can move a stake, you could delegate a stake, you could, give a stake away to somebody else, that type of thing. So it opens up optionality. And so having HSIs in the first place do that. Of course, if you do an HSI, you do not qualify for Communis, which is a separate reward token for native staking. But yeah, so HEX is the foundation of this idea. The actuator.finance operates as a bond market. And I'll get a little bit into that here in a minute. And but the idea that people can, you yourself, a whale, a shark, can go create your own issue of a bond. These are terminology. This is terminology coming out of TradFi. But you can go issue your own bond and earn on the bond based on the market participating or not. And at the very low end, when somebody creates a bond and puts up LP with it, you have ARB-like yield and rewards that come through. And on the other end of it, if you have participants who also want to tie themselves to that date or to that HTT, you have demand, which creates additional fees and revenue and trading. Now, along with the HTTs, we've got the Maximus DAO. And Maximus DAO is pretty good in that you have these pooled stakes, but they're different. There's not as much optionality. It's a one stake right now that's been done in the past. Hasn't been done lately, but it's been done in the past. And is on the market, and you can purchase those tokens. You can swap for those tokens and get exposure to a lot of HEX in the future at a different rate. And the way we're looking at that is they're packaged products might be a way to look at it. Packaged products, because they have a different risk reward level, but they're not quite as adaptable as the HTTs. With an HTT, for instance, you could decide you want an HSI, right? And you go get an HSI, or you have an HSI and you mint your HTTs. And then tomorrow you could decide you don't want to do that anymore and just return the HTTs and undelegate the stake, and then you're fully back in control that way. So you can always unwind whatever you're doing and go all the way back to the stake level. Again, optionality. That could come in handy at different points in market cycles. I know none of us feel like there'll ever be I should say none of us. Recency bias would make a lot of people feel like there's never going to be a top, right? Based on what we're saying. And so, but there will be. There's always going to be a cycle top. Are we already at the bottom? Maybe, perhaps, but there will be additional cycles in the future. So along with this, we also are tracking Hedron, which are tokenized HEX stakes. When people do the HSI and you get the Hedron protocol, though the prices are off and don't really allow it to make a lot of sense, you can borrow Hedron against HSIs as well. I'm not going to cover that here, but you can go look at that. And then Helgo, of course, is our HEX meme style token that's out there with a lot of liquidity, So all these make up, in concept, this idea of multiple ways that you can be participating in HEX and potentially earning rewards or yield. All right, so what's the key to this whole actuator thing? It's HEX. It's transforming the HEX ecosystem into a structured finance ecosystem. Stakes are collateral, HTTs are tradable bonds, and the actuator tokens that are given out in the farms are revenue sharing tokens. Revenue sharing tokens. What does that mean? Well, in normal farms, when you get an incentive token, you can just simply swap the incentive token out and take whatever rewards are there through the LP. In the actuator ecosystem, instead, you can also vault the actuator tokens and earn a portion of any of the new HTTs that are minted. Because when people mint HTTs, there's a 1% fee on the HTTs, and that gets distributed to the actuator vaulters. So that's how that's made up. Now, a lot of times when we're talking about this, it's hard for people to imagine what we mean when we talk about an HTT going to one-to-one with HEX. All right, so this is DeFi and it's crypto, and because we're using automated market makers, right? There's a lot of pressure back and forth on pricing, etc. Right? And those of you who are familiar with Maximus DAO or even Actuator already, you'll understand this a little bit better. But when I take a token and I mint it, an HTT token with a HEX end date as a redemption day in the future, you can kind of guess what the current rate should be for that HTT. Now, there could be some people that come up with some really fancy stuff, right? So what I'm going to show you is just something very, very simplified, super simplified. See each one of these lines? Each one of these lines represents an HTT with a different redemption date, right? So left to right, redemption day 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, Quattro Cinco, 6,000, 6666, 7,000, 7777, right? So you have each one of these lines going up from some number all the way to one-to-one, right? So let's start with the one-to-one, because this is in HEX terms. This has nothing to do with dollars, nothing to do with USD or fiat. You see how each one of them ends on the date in the future at one-to-one. I'm not saying that the market will value them one-to-one. What I am saying, though, is on redemption date, you can redeem those HTTs one-to-one for HEX. They could be redeemed one-to-one for HEX. And so when we look at each one of the HTTs, I used a calculation. It's an estimate. It's my best estimate at the moment, is that I think, and this is where other people come up with all the other ideas, I think it's reasonable to assume that a 5% discount 1 year out from the redemption date makes sense, and that 2 years out at 10% makes sense, and at 3 years out a 15% makes sense. And so if you go from that perspective, right, and you think about the annual percentage discount should be around 5%, you can actually create this little chart that I have up on the screen, the visual, that just shows that, hey, look, if you back it, year by year, boom, 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 you can come all the way to the left-hand side, right? And come up with estimated what what do you think the market discount should be? These are not exact numbers. It's just a guess. What should it be? But it's a way to then measure what's happening in the market, and I'll show you that on a different screen here in a moment, and show you exactly what's up with that. But the idea is that if the market is acting rational, which it does not always do, it doesn't always act rational. If the market is acting rationally, whether it's at this rate or some other rate, you would expect that the ratio to HEX will get really close to 1-to-1. At the redemption date. Well, why would it do that? Why, Crispy? Why would it go 1-to-1? Well, if the day before redemption, there's a whole bunch of these on the market, and they're discounted 50%, I can take them off the market, swap them off the market. A user could do that, buy them off the market, and then the next day realize a 50% ROI in HEX. Right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So, for instance, if I have an HTT 3000, which is the one that'll come up soonest in about 2 years for redemption, right now it's running about 15% of a discount, 20%, I think. If it remains at that level and we get to the day before redemption, why wouldn't someone buy them off the market with HEX and increase their HEX 20% overnight? Why wouldn't they do that? Subject to what's available on the market, etc. Of course, they're going to do it, right? Why wouldn't they? There'll be times where they don't, of course. I mentioned rational market and the idea that the ratio should appreciate to 1-to-1. Well, this is crypto. So people do what they want to do, right? So that may not always be the case. And we can see it day by day with a lot of different assets. It doesn't make sense. Why do people do it? Well, they have other goals that you might not know about. You don't know why they're doing it. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they have a different strategy. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they just want to get out, whatever they're going to do. And that creates what we call mispricings, right? Where something should be valued a little bit higher, but it's valued lower, or it should be valued lower and it's valued higher. And that is in part, a direct result of automated market making indexes, right? Because these indexes, you can't, there are certain cases we talk to like Johnny Chaos, right? Where you can try to peg something to a value, but that's not the case in free flowing markets. So in an AMM, if somebody has HTT 3000s, for instance, and they don't want to wait, and in fact, they just want to sell, well, of course the ratio is going to go down because they're going to sell it for HEX. And the ratio to HEX is going to go down, which creates an opportunity for somebody else who might be willing to, or who is willing to wait until the redemption day to get all the HEX. So it creates these fluctuations in mispricings, which can be related to or used as an example of like a DeFi bond market. Because as these bonds change, people pick them up, sell them, or whatever, for whatever their strategies might be. We're going to keep working on this. I'm going to keep working on trying to explain further with this over time. And I know some other people are going to jump in and talk about actuator over the next coming weeks. The HEX conference next week. There's a growing community of 400 or 500 people who are using the actuator protocol. We maybe see some growth there. With the actuator protocol, while I do think that extensive use of it would be awesome, there's also a low case where it's perfectly fine if it doesn't get a ton of adoption. Why do I say that? What is that? How does that make sense? Well, in the HEX ecosystem, there are people who have HSIs and they just want to exit. They're just done, tired, whatever. Well, this is a path for them to exit. They can come in, they can mint HTTs and sell them on the market. Causes a mispricing, and those who were interested in HEX in the future can pick them up at the cheaper value, which is kind of what I've been talking about, right? Somebody sells a bunch in, draws the price down. All of a sudden, these HTTs are a lot cheaper. So I'm not going to go into all the strategies because there's way too many different strategies really to cover adequately. But the two things from a general user perspective that really pop out is one. When these HTTs are significantly discounted, and you have to decide, whether it's good for you or not, but when they're significantly discounted, you can lock in an ROI, right? So what does that mean? Well, if an HTT is 20% below market to HEX, and you know that in 2 years, it's going to be 1-to-1 with HEX, you can automatically calculate that it's going to be a 20% ROI. So in HEX terms, you are able to lock in risk-free HEX yield. Risk-free HEX yield. Because you know through the immutable contract, through the audits, that this contract is going to give you HEX. And you know that it's going to give you HEX on redemption day because someone had to put up HEX stakes as collateral to get it. So it's all locked in. And so what you're able to do is when you see a discount, you can get risk-free HEX yield by simply buying those off the market. And that's something that we see on a pretty regular basis. It's been pretty interesting to watch. All right, continuation to that. The second idea that I would throw out there. So we did cheap HTTs. Now let's talk about expensive HTTs. Well, there are times where the HTTs are expensive. And of course, again, you have to decide whether you want to participate or not and do your own research. But when they are expensive on the market, meaning the market is overvaluing them for whatever reason, sometimes it's because somebody wanted to make a move and get a specific one, they wanted to go into the farms or whatever, and they drive the price up. Right? That happens all the time. Right? So people in crypto, with different tokens, they drive the price up. Well, if a HTT gets expensive enough, you can actually get more HEX or close to the same amount of HEX. If you were to go mint the HTT, swap it back for HEX, and then amplify your stakes by creating another stake. So we've seen people do that as well. So cheap case, people buy them off the market because they're locking in APR long-term. Expensive case, they take their HEX and they amplify it into perhaps additional stakes. Or simply do one more swap where they go mint an HTT. We just saw this on the HTT 7777s this week, where they were able to get 1.2 HEX per HTT. There's some number difference there, but they staked 100,000 HEX and they got 120,000 HEX. So they staked 100,000 HEX, minted. These are rough numbers, NISAC, but minted HTTs, and then swapped the HTTs for HEX. And they did that until the premium disappeared and it went into a discount. And that's called amplification. And so for that user, what they're able to do is to take the same amount of HEX and get more. You're going to end up with 2 stakes, that they own and they continue to earn on. So this is an amplification approach. So when the mispricings go into the expensive range, there are opportunities. So those are the 2 basic ways to look at the HTTs right now. As if you think they're cheap, perhaps you would swap into them. If you think they're expensive, perhaps you would mint them and sell them. And that's like the basic use case. Beyond that, there's farming in LP and becoming a bond issuer yourself. There's some really novel ideas out there about that. You can actually do your own bonds and create your own HTT little ecosystem with very little risk in the for future end dates, where you're pretty much in control of the entire little market and you can earn off of ARBs, over time. All right. So before we start going looking at the other daters out there, what we got in the chat? Let's see what we have over here. And then we're going to go look at some data. I see Tam. I did not tell you I was streaming. I don't know how you figured it out, but here I am. And here you are. Good to see you. Ruth and everyone else, Happy New Year. I know Okie Dokie likes charts. I've heard that before. And Fright Wank is here. And good to see you, friend. And it's a big Happy New Year. Poco Clips. When I do the T-shirt report later today, I'll look a little bit further at what the supply is and what's left. My observation is getting kind of thin on the markets. We've seen some really wild action today with the HTTs, and actually, I mean with HEX and HEX DC is what I meant to say. So I don't know if you guys have seen it, but HEX is up, had been up about 8-9% over the day, and so that created a whole bunch of stuff, whole bunch of action. Prices moving around. Susie Q, we love the crispy man. Good to see you. Good evening, Metatalk. All right. And Happy New Year to my friend JSO. Okay, so let's switch over to, we're going to switch over to our live demo. Let me share that. Go look at some daters and what's going on the screen, and maybe help illustrate this a little bit further, what I'm talking about. And of course, you guys can go over to actuator.finance at any time, go read their documents, join their Telegram, learn more about it, and you can see what's happening over there. All right, since we were talking about this, let's go and look. I'm going to update this real quick, make sure I've got the most freshest data up on the screen. And what this is this is a visual that I created to kind of keep track of what the values are here on these HTTs. So I'm going to kind of like bring this screen over here and up, make sure everybody else is seeing it. All right, take me off the screen. Don't need that, bottle that up. All right. So looking at the HTTs, and this will give you a little bit of an idea what my thought process is. When we look at it and we go down the list, we have each of the HTTs listed, HTT 7777 all the way down to 3000. I also have the HEX and the actuator pairs, primary pairs up there. I guess you could argue that the HEX pulse is not the primary pair, but it's one that I care about a lot. It shows liquidity. And so we're seeing the current USD price and then the price native. The price native is the price in HEX for the HTTs. And you can see that they are all at different ratios to HEX. 0.75 for the 777s, 0.62 for 7000s, 6666s at 0.91, 6000s at 0.69, HTT 5555 1.05. So right now there's probably a slim opportunity, but you could actually trade an HTT 5555 for more HEX. The mispricing is there. So there's some number, maybe it's at 10,000 or 20,000 HTTs, you could get more HEX. And then, of course, the higher you go, the greater the impact on the liquidity. And the liquidity is small, so it's $430 in this pair. So probably not more than a $5 or $10 opportunity, maybe a $20 opportunity right at the moment, where somebody can get just a free $20 worth of HEX because of the mispricing. It's easy to see when the price is greater than 1 HEX. That's for sure. That's my observation. Easy to see when it's greater than 1 HEX, because that all makes sense to all of us, right? I mean, hey, I put 1 HEX in, I get 1.05 HEX back. Well, that makes sense. You have to subtract your price impact and everything else. You get into percentages is a lot harder, which is kind of where the whole bond trading market in TradFi goes, right? To get into some deep analysis. And so this is a doorway into that world where people could be using TradFi-like methodologies to trade the yield curve on HTTs. But in any case, we run everywhere from 0.484 hex per HTT 3000 all the way up to that 1.05. So each one of these is a node on the curve, and each one of them represents an opportunity. Now today, for different types of trades, and typically they're time preference trades where people are like, hey, I'd like to get my HEX sooner, and it looks like it's a really good deal to take a high number HTT and swap it into a low number, or they might go the other way. In any case, there's lots of reasons people would do lots of different things, but oversimplification, this is the price. We can see prices are up on a lot of these tokens. HEX is up 8.2% in the last 24 hours, subject to change, of course, moving around quite a bit. And then each of the HTTs are up. Looks like HTT 3000, which has a pretty good amount of liquidity at 43K, is up following it. Its primary liquidity is with HEX, so it's going to follow HEX. You see the 5,000 at 7.7%, 4,000 at 1.52%, 6.66%, etc. So you see all these different HTTs moving around. Now, why are they all not following HEX exactly? Well, because they all have different LP setups. A little bit people do set up their own LP. And that means you do have some value that kind of squeaks out into other things. But primarily the reason something like the HTT 5000 doesn't just say, 8 point something, it's down at 6.66, is somebody did a trade, within that. And of course, this is, again, automated market making with DEXs. And so there are price impacts and whatnot, and so things do shift around, but each one of those opens up a different opportunity for a different strategy when they are mispriced. Let's move over a little bit on the screen. I made it bigger so everybody could see it, and then we'll take a look at make this a little smaller so we can see it all on the same screen. All right. Okay, this should do it. All right, so again, now we look at these. Remember how I showed you this this benchmark chart? We were looking at the benchmark. So here it is in live screen. We're showing this benchmark chart and how we can kind of guess what the current ratio should be. So let's guess at the 3,000. Right, so I'm looking at 3,000. This one right here. So the benchmark ratio, which is just my idea, is that currently the ratio to HEX should be about 0.9 or 90%. In discount terms, a 10% discount. 10% discount. And so now we're going to go look at and see what do we actually have. Well, for a 3,000 currently, the discount is 15%. 15%. All right. The benchmark is right about that 10% at 9.9%. The difference is a minus 5.5%. So in my little scheme of thinking, it appears to me that HTT 3000s are cheaper than they should be. They should be. Now, I don't, for myself, I don't mark them as cheap unless the difference is greater than 5% because of the price impacts and all the rest. But this indicates it's pretty close to being near the benchmark, but it's cheaper than it should be. Because remember, whether the market reflects it or not, an HTT 3000 is going to be one-to-one with HEX. Right? It will be one-to-one to HEX because anybody who holds them on redemption can turn them in one-to-one with HEX. So it will be one-to-one. And so the discount here right now is running around 15%. And so we can relate that to each of these. And you can look at the 4,000s. The 4,000s are near the benchmark. It's almost dead on what the benchmark is right now, which indicates that it's kind of like price neutral. HTT 5000's really close to the benchmark. It's only a couple ticks off, so it's very, very near the benchmark. And so we have cheap, near the benchmark, and then we have expensive. Those that appear to be more expensive than they should be based on that guess about the where the discount should be. And we can see that. We can see a negative. You can see actually this is really a premium. The minus 5.3% is a premium on the Quattro Cinco. The benchmark is 35%. And when you do the delta between that's a 41% difference from where it should be. All right, so that's the difference. 41% from where it should be, which indicates there's an opportunity for amplification. And so these are signal ideas on the right-hand side. And so we see that the later stakes or HTTs all seem to be expensive. Now, there's a difference between these different types that are out here that are important to point out, mostly having to do with LP. Right, there's $86,000 of LP for 7,000s, but only 1.6 for the 7777s, and that's because the Quattro 7s, the Quattro 6s, and the Quattro 5s, those are all community-driven proof of concepts for utilizing actuator.finance in the future for HEX staking and utilizing the ecosystem. And so they are not incentivized through farming, right? So because we don't have farming, you're not going to see as many people attracted to those because the farming rewards, which I'll show you, are pretty high right now. But if we look at the 7,000 as a great example, the 7,000 is off its mark by about 9%, 10%. So people are paying more for them than maybe what the benchmark says, right? Now, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Well, a lot of people tend to think longer term in HEX because, again, remember, subset of different groups of people here. A subset of a subset of a subset. If you're even watching this longer than a few minutes, you're probably interested in HEX staking, and everybody is not interested in HEX staking. And so there are a lot of people that are. And so if they're interested in HEX staking and they're looking for ways to get more HEX long term, then this is the type of thing that they're thinking about. And so, yeah, maybe they don't want to go through the trouble of staking to get the 7,000s. Instead, they just trade. Now, that may not be the best economical decision, but people always make their own decisions on this stuff, right, about what they want to do. And sometimes it's not worth the trouble to go through a bunch of other transactions and costs to get it. But at some point, somebody would buy up enough of the 7,000s that someone else will take the deal, right? They'll take the premium. Why wouldn't they do it? They do it. In fact, what we see over day is that these things flash between expensive, near benchmark, cheap, because different actors are doing different things. And so you might be sitting here saying, well, why would anybody even want to buy these 7,000s? Why would you even want to buy a 7,000? Well, 7,000 is a long way out. I mean, it's still got 10, 12 years, right, to get to HEX day 7,000. So it's getting exposure to HEX way out there in the future. But if we go over to the actuator protocol, you can see that on their dashboard, they're showing that the fixed return in HEX is 61% on the 7,000. So this would be like an example why somebody might want to swap for them. So what does that mean? Well, let's go by redemption day. And we're going to look at the 7,000s right here on the screen. And so the 7,000 right now has a discount, according to this panel, of 37% to HEX, which means it costs something like 63.62 something HEX per HTT 7,000. And it gives you a fixed APR of 4.63%, which is really close to a Quattro Cinco stake, by the way. So it gives you a fixed rate. How do we know it's a fixed rate of 4.63%? Well, we know that in 13.1 years, HTT 7,000 is going to be 1 HEX. So you can do that calculation and lock in the reward. So then the total return is 60%. But that's not the whole story. So there's that story where you can get the 60% AP, 60% ROI, but you can also use their farms, and currently that is paying an additional 38% APR by putting up LP. And so, we're talking about that screen where we're like, well, why would somebody pay over market? Well, they pay over market because they want to come get these HTT 7000s and lock in the LP with HEX. And then they're earning now 38% on their HEX HTT 7000. So they're already having the exposure. However, they got the HTT 7000 to HEX yield, whether they bought it or they minted it. Right? If they minted it, they have an HSI, so getting exposure to the underlying rewards of HEX. And then when they go in the farms, they're getting the additional few percent, 1 or 2% for V2 LP plus the farming reward. And so all of a sudden you're looking at an additional maybe 40% APR by providing LP on HTT 7000 to HEX. And that's paid out in the actuator token. So let me check, see if anybody has a question about that. If you guys have a question about that, you guys let me know. But I'm just trying to kind of illustrate what we're talking about here and why people might do that. Why they might do it. And so that's the case. So let's go. We're going to shift to kind of numbers mode. You see, we've already been on for about 40 minutes. We'll switch to numbers mode and just kind of start observing. You guys have questions? Put them in the chat. Oh, along with that, let's look at the other farms that are here. We can see the 3000s paying 27%. Remember, that's the one that's marked as cheap right now, relatively cheap. You can either swap on the market for them or mint them yourself. But the APR on that is 27.4. The 4000s, 55.2%. This has been getting a lot of action because people like that. 55.2%. The 5000s are 36.2%, 6000 49.8%, and then the 7000s are 38.3%. You can always come to this panel, to this page, and look at this information on the screen. You can see the farm deposits listed right up on the screen, etc. Right. Now, with the farming rewards are paid out in actuator token. They are paid out in actuator token. So there are two angles, as I mentioned before, on that. One, you can take the actuator and just swap it right out and get whatever you want for it. Actually, the actuator protocol price has held up pretty good because a lot of people, what they're doing instead of swapping them out is they'll come to the vaults page and they'll deposit. They'll deposit the actuator into the vaults. Now, why would they do that? Well, we see a lot of minting on HTT 7000s, for instance. And of course, the 4000 right now I showed you was the highest APR. Well, because if you come in and you put actuator into the vaults here for the 4000, and somebody has done this, so we have 24 million actuator in there. You earn, depending on your percentage of the deposit, part of the 1% fee. And so you're earning additional HTTs, which is additional HEX in the future by putting the actuator in here. Makes it a little sticky. Actuator is actually inflationary at the moment because actuator is distributed for another year and 10 months to people who are in the farms. But after that, it does have a cap supply of 1 billion. And after that, it becomes deflationary. And the reason it becomes deflationary is that there's when people come in and out of the vaults, you have to lock up for 90 days. And if you get out early, you just simply lose a portion of your ACTRs, your actuator tokens, and they get burned. So long-term deflationary, near-term inflationary token, considered to be a incentive but revenue token. Right? So if you believed in this ecosystem very long term and the idea that people might use it, you would hold on to the actuator so you can always have revenue in HEX. And if you're less certain about the future, you would take your rewards and cash them in. You take your rewards and cash them in, right? And take those actuator and sell it and get it off, and just take that reward and off you go. So those are the different ways you might handle that. All right. Just looking at long-term T-share rate, which does affect this whole thing. One of the things we do find is that people are a little less concerned about being exactly Quattro Cinco, but Quattro Cinco is a big part of the protocol. And our actual share rate right now, let's see what we get here, is around that 44,000 level. And over time, the share rate just is going up, right? Just up into the future until we get up to something like 80,000. And so a lot of people have come to the conclusion that our stakers, that they want exposure to the maximum length of time Quattro Cincos. And, again, the actuator.finance gives you the optionality to be able to participate in HEX, but also have some access to the liquidity out into the future. So that's affecting the share rate increases. All right. So we already looked at this little table here, just showing what the current setups are for these and what they are. We look at related tokens. You can look at the other tokens that are out there and what they're doing today. We did see a run up on Hedron last 24 hours, ICOSA as well. So Hedron, very limited liquidity out there, but Hedron on Pulse Chain was up 11%, Helgo 4.96%, Deci 6.63%, Com up 3.5%, and Maxi up 2.2%. The liquidity I have listed on the screen is not the primary liquidity necessarily for these, because they all have liquidity on things like PHUX and Tide, etc. And there are other pools, but I wanted to show the HEX ratios. I have them up here on the screen. You can see the uptrends on those. So they're all moving up. If we look at what I consider to be packaged products, we can do a very similar calculation as we were looking at for the HTTs to figure out what the benefit is of getting an HTT. And you can see that for the Deci right now, I am estimating that the payout per Deci in the future is 2.35 HEX per Deci, and that the current price is 0.84. which means it's at a discount, right? In my mind, so the estimated APR on that per Deci is 26% with an ROI of 179%. I know a lot of people look at this and think, why is that so cheap? Well, again, these are markets, right? So people are going to put up whatever liquidity they put up, and if they're not available in the market, if liquidity is not available in the market, and some people exit, they make these discounts, right? And so they ends up with a severe discount. And so my estimated APR on the Deci through November of 32 is around 7 years, right? Is 26%. So that's higher than everything that I've seen. For staking, per se. We do the calculation. I mean, it's still subject to the same underlying APRs that HEX has, but again, I'm doing this calculation based on the estimated payout of 2.35. The Maxi is estimated to be a little bit over 3 HEX per Maxi, and currently the price is 1.12, and that translates to something like a 14% APR with 168% ROI. Okay. And then looking at our Mayer multiples and what we're seeing for Mayer multiples right now, this is more of a general kind of a chart. but let's look and see. This is looking at each of these assets, whether we're talking about Helgo, EHEX, or the HTTs, etc., and what their Mayer multiples are in terms of the columns. And so what does this mean? So if I look at EHEX, and somebody asked me this question today, they said, well, what's the best way to acquire EHEX right now? Well, based on the charts, and this is pretty much for everything, the lower this number is the 0.52, the better. And so the 0.52 going from stables EDI to EHEX is the best deal. The next best deal is PulseX, because PulseX had a run up. We look at Helgo, what's the best way to get in? No denying it, of course, stables. The next best way is actually EHEX, looks like, right? Subject to whatever you see on the market, you got to check the pricing and all the rest, but HTT 3000's best way in stables, followed by EHEX. 4000's stables, followed by PulseX. 5,000 stables, followed by, it looks like, EHEX. So you can kind of see a theme here, and this has to do with how things are relatively valued in the system. And so you can just see what's best to accumulate these through, based on the ratios. And then PHEX down here at the bottom, of course, again, stables, followed by EHEX is probably the next best. EHEX has been gaining a little bit on PX. I'm not saying it's a good trade. I'm just saying, looking at the ratios, you get the best value if you're going to go from EHEX into PHEX at the 0.70. And again, you guys always make your own decisions with this stuff. Share rate changes. We've been seeing the share rate changes come up as expected. I guess we're somewhere around that, almost 43,800 at this point. 43,800. We looked at this. We looked at actuator. The other thing I would say with the actuator protocol, if you're going to look at the panel, a lot of this stuff is pretty detailed, right? It takes time to kind of get your head around it, and that's why I'm trying to just demonstrate. Hey, the litmus test might be, hey, is it expensive or is it cheap, right? If you're interested at all, right? Maybe that's the first step, is to look at, is it cheap or is it expensive? Now, they do a great job on their panel here, where you can come in and just look real quick, and I'll tell you which ones are best for selling. Right now, this is what I was mentioning, the 7777s. They're best for selling because they're overpriced, so people can mint them and sell them. Right, so it'll pop this up. 7777 probably won't be here forever. Probably drop off at some point and become another one as the prices change. What's the best for buying? Remember, I mentioned this 3,000 look cheap. Well, they're saying, hey, it's cheap. So it's best for buying off the market based on what they're saying. And then the best total return is the 7,000. So you could really work at a very high level and kind of get an idea of what's going on here by looking at these panels that they have at the top to kind of lead you to what you might want to do or might be interested in. All right, with that, I think we're gonna wrap up. I see you, Manitok, out there, and of course, Mr. Fast. He's always here for the tech. So again, I go back to talking about this idea, this whole HEX bond market. Why am I excited about this? This is not just vanilla HEX staking. The HSIs by themselves provide optionality. For a long time, I was not in favor, or I guess it wasn't, I was maxi. I was more native stake only, particularly involving the communist area and what we get for rewards for communists. Because remember, HSIs don't get communists. They do get Hedron, but they don't get communists. But I recognize that now we have a working product, a working ecosystem out there where I can do HSIs and have optionality, flexibility to do something with those HSIs. I don't have to do anything with them. I don't have to. I can just leave them alone, right? I don't have to do anything with them. but and they're not, and the use of HSIs for this protocol is not directly affected by whatever happens with the Hedron ecosystem and what might be a new version. Remember, HEX is already immutable, so people can do HEX staking. Hedron ecosystem, the Hedron contract for HSIs, that is immutable, and it utilizes HEX to create stakes. And the actuator ecosystem is immutable, and it uses HSIs. So these things are already sunk in, and the technology is available and immutable, right? So they will continue to operate. So it gives you that optionality. And so I don't have to go very far. You guys don't have to go very far to hear from people that staking is dead and it's silly and, blah, blah, blah. So that's created a significant, I think, a significant R&R risk reward. They might be right. Big risk, don't know what's going to happen in 15 years, right? Don't know. But there's not a risk in terms of HEX because you have more HEX. What they're talking about with the risk and reward has to do with dollars, right? Which is more about an overall market and participation in a market. So I see this actuator protocol as a potential additional vector for a lot of people to get involved to do more things with HEX, right? And the big question is, does something like actuator drive more HEX adoption, or is it more just monkeying around with the same old? And I think it does drive more HEX adoption and staking. It does. But that's just from my observation. I hope to prove that over some time, be able to show that. I'm not a founder. I think you guys know that. I'm not part of the team or anything like that. I'm just looking at the ecosystem and how it operates. All right, with that, I don't see any further questions. So I am going to go ahead and end this stream. Hey, thanks everybody for joining me. Share this out to somebody who might be interested. Go take a look at actuator.finance or their Telegram to get more information about this. And they will, we are planning to do a panel. I'm going to participate with the founder in a panel at Matty Allen's HEX conference next week. We'll dig in a little bit, and I'll do a lot less talking, and we'll hear from some community members who are utilizing the protocol. And with that, everybody have a happy new year, and we will see you next time. You gotta stay crispy.
Yo, T, urgent HEX buy signal. Charts flaming hot.
Golden ratio, huh? That's how legends stack T-shares.
Get them while they're crispy, folks. This window won't stay open long.
Stake smart. Win big. Time rewards those who act.
Stay crispy, Hexicans.
You gotta move it, move it! Feel the rhythm of the blockchain.